In 1987, you could get a five-course breakfast for $2 at places that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. 15 breakfast giants served millions daily, then vanished without a trace. What happened that they don't want you to remember? Orange roofs dotted America's highways like oversized traffic cones, and underneath them sat something magical. Howard Johnson's wasn't just another restaurant chain, the Asterisk restaurant chain. At its peak, more than 1,000 locations sprawled across the United States, making it the largest restaurant empire in the country. That's bigger than McDonald's was for decades. The real draw? 28 flavors of ice cream. While other places served vanilla and chocolate, Hojo's had butter brickle, frozen pudding, and maple walnut. Kids dragged their parents off interstate exits just to stare at those gleaming tubs behind the counter. But the adults knew the secret. Those fried clams were absolutely legendary. Crispy, golden, and served with a side of nostalgia you couldn't get anywhere else. Then there were the breakfast plates, thick pancakes, eggs cooked exactly how you wanted them, and hash browns that actually tasted like potatoes. Simple stuff, but executed perfectly every single time across 1,000 kitchens. What's wild is how completely Howard Johnson's vanished. A century-long run that defined American road trips just ended. The final restaurant closed its doors in 2022, and with it went those orange roofs forever. Makes you wonder how something so dominant could disappear so completely, right? Well, Howard Johnson's wasn't alone in that fate. Another breakfast giant was about to face an even more dramatic downfall. If Howard Johnson's was the polite giant of American dining, Sambo's was the scrappy underdog that grew way too fast for its own good. This pancake-focused chain launched in 1957 and became a breakfast phenomenon almost overnight. We're talking 24-hour service when that was still revolutionary. Cheap meals when families actually needed them. At its peak, Sambo's had over 1,100 locations spread across nearly every state in America. That's massive expansion in just 2 decades. The restaurants were everywhere. Highway stops, suburban corners, downtown strips. Their pancakes were fluffy, their coffee was hot, and their prices couldn't be beat. But here's where things get messy. The name itself became a huge problem. What started as a combination of the founders' names, Sam Battistone and Newell Bonnet, unfortunately shared its moniker with a racially insensitive children's story. The imagery and branding choices made things even worse. As social awareness grew in the late 1970s, protests mounted. Customers stayed away. The company tried rebranding some locations, but the damage was done. Management also made classic expansion mistakes. Too many stores, too much debt, not enough quality control. By 1981, Sambo's declared bankruptcy. Over 1,000 restaurants vanished almost as quickly as they'd appeared. Only the original location in Santa Barbara survived for decades, though even that eventually closed. Speaking of breakfast chains that faced their own unique challenges, Village Inn took a completely different approach to the pancake game. Moving from the pancake wars of the late 50s, Denver gave birth to another breakfast champion in 1958. Village Inn Pancake House wasn't trying to be fancy or revolutionary. They just wanted to serve massive plates of food that stuck to your ribs. The formula was beautifully simple. Walk in, grab a booth, and get ready for bottomless coffee that could fuel a construction crew. Their pies sat in those spinning glass cases like edible artwork. Apple, cherry, chocolate cream, each one thick enough to use as a doorstop. But here's the thing that made Village Inn special. They treated breakfast like a serious meal, not just something you grabbed on the way to work. By the 80s, over 200 Village Inn locations dotted the Midwest like comfort food beacons. The atmosphere screamed classic American diner, red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and waitresses who called everyone Han. You could order a stack of pancakes at 2 p.m. and nobody batted an eye. Then reality hit hard. Multiple bankruptcies knocked them around like a pinball. Competition from faster chains and economic downturns kept chipping away at their empire. Today, fewer than 120 locations remain. Many converted to other concepts entirely, but their legacy lives in every diner that still believes coffee should be bottomless and pie should be a food group. Speaking of breakfast chains that faced even tougher battles, while Sambo's was falling apart in the early 80s, another breakfast chain was quietly dominating mornings across America. Mr. Donut opened its doors in Chicago back in 1956, And by the 1980s, more than 500 locations were serving fresh donuts and coffee to sleepy commuters nationwide. The timing was perfect. Americans were embracing grab-and-go breakfast culture, and Mr. Donut delivered exactly what people wanted: hot donuts, strong coffee, and quick service. Their signature Dunkin'-style coffee became legendary among regulars who'd line up every morning for their caffeine fix. But here's where things get interesting. Most people today have never heard of Mr. Donut, even though it was everywhere just 40 years ago. What happened? Well, the donut wars of the early 90s changed everything. Dunkin' Donuts was expanding aggressively, and instead of fighting a brutal competition battle, they made a smart business move. They bought out most Mr. Donut locations and converted them. Practically overnight, hundreds of orange and brown Mr. Donut signs disappeared, replaced by the familiar pink and orange Dunkin' branding. By the late 1990s, Mr. Donut had vanished completely from American streets. The weird part is that the brand didn't actually die, it just moved. Today, Mr. Donut thrives in Japan with hundreds of locations, proving that sometimes a chain's second act happens on the other side of the world. Speaking of chains that couldn't survive the competition wars, let's head to Pittsburgh. Most people today would scratch their heads at the name Winky's, but back in the 1960s and 70s, that little winking mascot meant serious business in Pittsburgh. This wasn't some quirky mom-and-pop joint. We're talking about a legitimate fast food operation that launched in 1962 with big dreams and an even bigger slogan: Winky's makes you happy to be hungry. The weird part is how they positioned themselves. While McDonald's was pushing burgers and fries, Winky's decided to play both sides of the field. Sure, they had hamburgers, but walk in on any given morning and you'd find folks digging into pancakes, scrambled eggs, and hash browns. They were doing the all-day breakfast thing before it became trendy. At their peak, more than 40 locations dotted Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Each restaurant featured that unmistakable winking character on the sign, practically begging drivers to pull over for a quick bite. The breakfast crowd loved them because you could grab a proper meal without the fancy diner prices. But here's where things get brutal. The fast food wars of the late 1970s and early 80s weren't kind to smaller chains trying to compete with the big boys. When McDonald's and Burger King started throwing serious money at expansion and marketing, Winky's couldn't keep up. By 1982, bankruptcy papers were filed, and those winking signs went dark forever. Speaking of tiny breakfast spots that couldn't survive the changing times, let's talk about a place where you literally couldn't find a seat. Walking into a Toddle House was like stepping into a shoebox. These tiny diners could barely squeeze a dozen customers around their U-shaped counters, but that was the whole point. The 1930s concept was brilliantly simple. Keep it small, keep it fast, keep it open all night. Picture this cramped little box where everyone sat elbow to elbow, watching short-order cooks flip eggs and hash browns just inches away. The sizzle, the chatter, the coffee refills, it created this weird intimacy you couldn't get anywhere else. Makes sense why people became regulars, right? By the 1970s, over 300 Toddle Houses dotted the South and Midwest. Each one looked identical. Tiny white building, neon sign, counter, seating only. No tables, no booths, no privacy. Just you, your waffles, and whoever happened to be sitting next to you at 2 a.m. The weird part is how perfectly this worked for decades. While other chains expanded their menus and floor plans, Toddle House stayed stubborn. Same small size, same simple breakfast fare, same all-night hours. Their hash browns were legendary among night shift workers and insomniacs, but the late 1980s brought changing appetites. People wanted space, variety, and frankly, somewhere they could sit with their families. The parent company quietly shuttered most locations as America moved toward bigger, flashier breakfast spots. Speaking of chains that couldn't adapt to changing tastes, let's talk about a place that bet everything on pie. While other chains were battling over burgers and fried chicken, Poppin' Fresh Pies took a different approach. They decided America needed more pie. A lot more pie. Started in the 1960s, this wasn't your typical restaurant chain. Sure, they served breakfast, omelets, waffles, the usual suspects, but walk into any Poppin' Fresh Pies and you'd be smacked in the face by the most ridiculous pie menu you'd ever seen. We're talking dozens of varieties. Apple, cherry, coconut cream, chocolate silk, lemon meringue. They had pies most people couldn't even pronounce. The weird part? It actually worked. By the early 1980s, over 170 locations were buzzing with customers who came for breakfast but stayed for dessert. Or came for dessert but ordered breakfast first. The bottomless coffee didn't hurt either. People would camp out for hours, working through slice after slice. But here's where things got messy. A corporate buyout in the mid-80s changed everything. New owners tried to streamline operations, cut costs, mess with the formula that made them special. Big mistake. Most locations got rebranded or simply shut down by the late 80s. The epic pie menu that made them famous? Gone. Today you might find a few spots operating under the Baker Square name, but the original pop and fresh magic vanished decades ago. Speaking of vanished magic, let's head west to California, where another breakfast chain was serving up something completely different. While some breakfast chains went national, others carved out regional empires that felt just as mighty. Lyons Restaurant built exactly that kind of kingdom along the West Coast, turning simple morning meals into something special with their cozy country decor and generous portions. The chain hit its stride during the late 1970s and early 1980s when California dining was exploding with possibilities. Lyons wasn't trying to be fancy or revolutionary. They just wanted to serve massive breakfast combos in restaurants that felt like your grandmother's kitchen, assuming she had impeccable taste in wood paneling and checkered tablecloths. Their cinnamon rolls became legendary. Not the tiny, disappointing kind you'd find elsewhere, but actual plate-sized monsters dripping with icing. Pair that with their syrupy waffles and perfectly seasoned hash browns, and you had a breakfast that could fuel someone for days. The portions were almost aggressive in their generosity. At their peak, Lyons operated 158 locations, mostly scattered across California and neighboring states. Weekend mornings meant packed dining rooms and lines out the door. But the 1990s brought shifting tastes and brutal competition from fast casual chains that could serve food quicker and cheaper. Lyons couldn't adapt fast enough. Their last location closed in 2012, ending decades of West Coast breakfast dominance. But not every chain disappeared quietly into regional obscurity. Like Lyons, some had much weirder stories. Steak and ale wasn't just about steaks. Well, the name fooled everyone, but this chain knew how to do breakfast right. Founded in 1966, they built their reputation on dimly lit dining rooms and that famous all-you-can-eat salad bar. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Weekend mornings transformed these steakhouses into breakfast gold mines. The genius was simple. Why let expensive real estate sit empty during breakfast hours? Makes sense, right? Nearly 300 locations across America started opening early, serving everything from fluffy pancakes to loaded breakfast skillets. Those same salad bars that drew dinner crowds, they pivoted to fresh fruit, pastries, and breakfast fixings that kept families coming back every Sunday morning. And the weird part is, many people discovered steak and ale through breakfast first, then returned for dinner. Cross-promotion at its finest, decades before anyone called it that. Then the late 1980s hit like a sledgehammer. Fast casual breakfast joints exploded everywhere. Suddenly, waiting for table service felt outdated when you could grab quality breakfast quickly elsewhere. The company couldn't adapt fast enough to changing breakfast habits. By the early 2000s, those weekend breakfast crowds had vanished completely. Store after store closed, taking their breakfast buffets with them. The steak and ale name disappeared entirely by the mid-2000s. But speaking of breakfast chains that couldn't survive the changing times, there's another story about an iconic mascot. While California still clings to a few original Bob's Big Boy locations, the rest of America watched this breakfast icon vanish completely. That famous chubby mascot in checkered overalls, he used to greet hungry families at hundreds of diners from coast to coast. Bob's wasn't just about those towering double-decker burgers everyone remembers. The real magic happened at breakfast time. Their skillets arrived sizzling hot, loaded with hash browns, scrambled eggs, and whatever meat you wanted piled on top. The pancakes were thick as phone books and just as satisfying. During the 1970s and early 80s, big boy diners dotted the American landscape like freckles. Nearly every mid-sized town had one, usually packed on Sunday mornings with families ordering those famous breakfast platters. The mascot became a cultural icon. Kids loved spotting him from the back seat. Then Marriott bought the chain, and everything went sideways fast. They expanded too quickly, opened too many locations without proper planning, quality dropped, service suffered, the whole operation started bleeding money like a busted pipe. Most franchisees couldn't keep up with the corporate chaos. One by one, locations outside California either converted to different restaurants or simply shut their doors forever. The big boy mascot disappeared from most of America, leaving only childhood memories and a few stubborn California holdouts. But speaking of chains that expanded too fast and paid the price, let's talk about a place that tried serving steaks cafeteria style. York Steak House looked like someone took a cafeteria and decided to throw meat at the problem. Founded in Columbus, Ohio in 1966, this place had an identity crisis from day one. Was it a steakhouse, a cafeteria, a breakfast joint? The answer was yes to all three, somehow. Walk into any York Steakhouse and you grab a tray like you're in a school lunch line. But instead of mystery meat, you'd slide past counters loaded with sizzling steaks, scrambled eggs, and hash browns that actually looked appetizing. The morning steak and egg special became their signature move, because nothing says good morning like a T-bone at 7 a.m., right? By the early 1980s, nearly 200 locations dotted the country. People loved the no-nonsense approach. Point at what you want, pay at the register, find a table, done. The prices stayed reasonable because they cut out servers and fancy presentation. Your steak came on a basic plate, but it was hot and filling. Then, everything fell apart faster than a poorly cooked omelet. McDonald's breakfast took off. Fancy steakhouse chains started popping up everywhere. Suddenly, York's cafeteria-style service felt outdated instead of efficient. The company couldn't compete with either end of the market. Most locations vanished by the late 1980s. But speaking of breakfast battles, another chain was fighting an even stranger war against changing tastes. Here's the thing about Lums. They figured out something brilliant that nobody talks about anymore. Hot dogs boiled in beer. Sounds weird? Maybe. But it worked like crazy. Founded in Miami Beach in 1956, Lums started small with this bizarre cooking method. The beer gave their hot dogs this unique flavor that people couldn't get anywhere else. Smart move, actually. While other chains were copying each other, Lums went completely different. But breakfast was their secret weapon. Those early morning omelets were legendary. Fluffy, massive, and cheap enough that construction workers would line up before dawn. They served breakfast all day too, which was pretty revolutionary back then. The expansion happened fast. By the 1970s, Lums had hundreds of locations nationwide. Their breakfast crowds were insane. People would wait 20 minutes for a table just to get those omelets and crispy hash browns. Then KFC swooped in and bought them in 1971. You'd think that would help, right? Wrong. KFC tried to mess with the formula. They wanted everything standardized, corporate, boring. The beer-boiled hot dogs stayed, but the soul of the place? Gone. Competition crushed them. McDonald's breakfast menu launched. Wendy's got aggressive. By 1983, most Lums had vanished. The last real location hung on until 2009. But by then, it was just a ghost of what once was. Speaking of ghosts, another chain was about to pull off one of the strangest rebranding moves ever. Nobody really talks about Druther's anymore, but back in the day, this chain was serving up breakfast buffets that could feed a small army. The story gets weird right from the start. Druther's wasn't even Druther's originally. It started life as Burger Queen in the 1960s, doing the whole fast food royalty thing before McDonald's made that completely played out. Then 1981 rolled around and someone in corporate had a brilliant idea. Let's rebrand as Druther's, because apparently I'd rather go to Druther's was supposed to be catchy. Well, the name change worked better than anyone expected. These restaurants became legendary for their breakfast buffets, especially in smaller Midwest and Southern towns. We're talking scrambled eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuits, gravy, pancakes, basically everything your doctor would warn you about on one plate. Kids went crazy for the soft-serve ice cream machines. Parents loved the all-you-can-eat pricing that actually made financial sense when feeding multiple mouths. At peak performance, Druther's had over 170 locations scattered across Middle America. The weird part is how they dominated these small-town breakfast scenes for decades, then just vanished. By 2007, the last U.S. location had converted to something else entirely. But here's the kicker. Druther's isn't completely dead. The brand somehow survived in Belize, of all places. Meanwhile, another breakfast chain was about to discover that geography wasn't going to save them either. While other chains were battling it out nationwide, VIP's restaurant carved out its own little kingdom in the Pacific Northwest. Very Important People's Restaurant, yeah, that's what VIP's actually stood for, wasn't trying to conquer America. They just wanted to serve really good breakfast to folks in Oregon and Washington. Picture a cross between your neighborhood coffee shop and that classic pancake house your grandparents loved. That was VIP's. 53 locations at their peak, each one packed with locals ordering stacks of pancakes, perfectly cooked eggs, crispy hash browns, and toast so thick you could use it as a doorstop. The genius move? Breakfast all day, every day. Want pancakes at 3 p.m.? No problem. Craving eggs? Benedict at 9 p.m.? They had you covered. This wasn't some gimmick, it was their entire identity. But here's where things get interesting. In 1984, the owners decided to sell. Most locations got converted to Denny's practically overnight. Others just closed their doors forever. The VIP signs started disappearing one by one across the Northwest. By the late 1990s, the last VIP sign had faded completely. The chain that once made everyone feel like a very important person became just another memory. Speaking of regional chains that disappeared without a trace, there was another spot that mixed the most unlikely menu combinations you've ever seen. Ever hear of a place that sold tacos and pastrami burgers on the same menu? Welcome to the beautifully weird world of Pup and Taco. This LA-based chain launched in 1956 with the most confusing identity crisis in fast food history. Picture walking into a restaurant where you could order crispy tacos, hot dogs, glazed donuts, and breakfast burritos all from the same counter. Makes sense, right? Well, somehow it worked. The orange and yellow signs became as much a part of Southern California as palm trees and traffic jams. But here's where things get interesting. Pup and Taco wasn't trying to be everything to everyone. They were genuinely good at their crazy mix. Their breakfast burritos were legendary before breakfast burritos were even a thing. The pastrami was thick and juicy. The tacos, actually pretty decent for a chain that also sold donuts. Then corporate America happened. Taco Bell's parent company decided they wanted those prime California locations. In 1984, they bought up most of the Pup and Taco restaurants and shut them down faster than you could say combo meal. The weirdest part? They didn't even try to keep the concept alive. Just bulldozed the whole thing and slapped Taco Bell signs on the buildings. Sometimes the corporate world has no appreciation for beautiful chaos.